Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming and hanging with John and I. Shady was going to be here, like she was here a minute ago, and then she's like, they're turning the camera on, I'm gone. So, but for the you Shady lovers, be aware she has said she wants to come join us and hang out, maybe sometime later this month. I was going to suggest that she show up next Monday, and then I wasn't going to tell her anything else.
Wait a second. Next Monday, we're all going to be sitting and watching. We'll be in the chat room. We'll be in the chat.
But, yeah. I'm just going to be that person. I love Shady, and it's all good. But in that note, for those of you that just got done watching one football game, Ron Roos team won, and we're just going to let it at that.
Did the Patriots, did they actually find somebody to be a quarterback, or did they just kind of like, hey, let's just go without that position?
They had a person who was playing that position.
Good.
But I think from what I watched of the game, that was about it. It wasn't good.
And to a point, that bridges us into tonight's topic, where in this particular case, a person couldn't perform at the event, and that's really a discussion that almost became part of real for me last weekend. But it's something that has changed, from what it was last year, 5 years, 10 years ago. And that's really what tonight is. The discussion is how do you handle it, or how will you be handling it as we go forward when you can't perform for whatever reason? So I always like to, let's reflect back. Dan, 5 years ago, you have your schedule. You're looking at it and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I got the schedule, everything looks good, but there's always in the back of your mind that you may get sick or something might happen and you can't go and do these things. What was kind of your procedure if something would have happened and you couldn't have done the event?
So there was always key dates that when you look at the calendar, or you get all the emails that come in and or you're talking with those that are typically the people you refer to, when you're booked, you refer these people, and you start looking at the dates and you go, that's a date that I've heard from that one, and that one that they don't have open. And I already sent the other ones a lead or two. I got to be deathbed if I'm, because there's going to be no one to cover for me then.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where you'd have maybe 2 of those dates a year, maybe 3 if it was just kind of a weird numbers year. But for the most part, you know that you knew that you could rely on somebody that was in your circle was probably going to be open, at least 1 or 2. Mm-hmm. And so my procedure was to always kind of have that list ready to go. Always just kind of in contact with my circle of, just, hey, how's it going? Not really like, hey, do you have something this weekend just in case? But just kind of always talking to them to kind of see where things were at. And I always had a couple on my list and a couple in my circle that I would call more hobbyist.
Okay. Sure.
When it comes to this career, to where, they were very fine with not really promoting too much, doing a handful of weddings in a year, and then the rest of the year just kind of hanging back and not really doing too much. They did a good job, but they weren't lighting the world on fire in any way, shape, or form. So my go around was always just kind of keep that contact, keep that touch there, in case I needed somebody.
Mm-hmm. So they very similar, except it was all that my backups were always in the house.
Yeah.
In my case, actually when Lori was DJing with around a regular basis, so we were both out, we had either staff. We kept one staff person back as a backup, or we had an acquaintance or two that were in the industry. Early on, going back 20 years, that was back when basically DJs hated other DJs, and it was this competition thing. So you never talked to other DJs. And our method of a backup was, having a second person or third person and having one on call at all times. But as time kind of progressed and our staff, grew and then it kind of contracted, we ended up having more acquaintances in the industry that became really good friends and say, hey, we could, could you cover? It was never needed in our time, but it was always there. And that was the way it went. But over the last number of years, when I've been pretty much a solo op, it's always been in the back of the mind that, if something happened, Lori could go out there and run Megaseg, and that wasn't even a reason to say it, but it was the reality of the moment. But she could run that software because she had a little experience with it and could function. So that was my backup, which has been fine. And then over the last couple of years, as Michael's gotten into it, Laurie's like, I can go with him and basically MC, and he could do the music, and they could function, and they'd function at a really high level at that point with the two of them, because she's comfortable talking in front of a crowd and does very well on a microphone and comes through very, very well and personal. And Michael, the mixing side of it, yeah, he's got that, no problem. So that was the backup. Then something happened back in March in the United States. The world crashed for us or something.
Pretty much.
So now we've moved into this new reality. And as a single op DJ, 2 point, and that really we both are that because Michael is kind of drifted away from it. How have you changed coming into this year now as you're looking at the backup help?
So in some aspects, it hasn't really changed for me because I was always relying on that acquaintance group and keeping that until what I've had to do though is to kind of go a little bit wider with my circle, where there was just a couple that were kind of key. But what is really kind of, unfortunately, what's kind of hurt me, but also helped me, I guess, for lack of better terms, is that as I have kind of climbed, for lack of better terms, the ladder, all right, for both price point and the quality, I'm not the top. I know I have things to improve upon, but when it comes to the price point, I'm near the top in my market.
Sure.
So back in the day when I could, or when I didn't know as much, for me to find somebody, it was not really a big deal. If they could push a button, they could fill in,
right?
And as long as they didn't screw things up, if it was the last minute because things were that bad, at least it was somebody. Now it's gotten to the point where I really I kind of have to branch that circle out, but I've actually gone for a farther distance so that I could keep my quality level of who I'm reaching out to a little bit higher. What's weird though is this year, so while that's become somewhat difficult because the high quality guys are getting the phone calls for those last minute ones, everybody kept getting things pushed off. So when it's last minute, the high quality guys are the ones that are getting calls first, which they should, in my viewpoint. Where you're having difficult, or said where it's helping is the fact that because people are being pushed off, there's dates that typically wouldn't be open, and they have something open. So case in point, Eric Stoner out in State College, he's about an hour from me. He runs a multi-op out there, does a fantastic job with Nittany Entertainment. He's one of the guys that I kind of keep talking to and making sure I reach out. October 10th, this weekend, 10/10/2020. I mean, it was the date for pretty much everybody, and anybody that was anybody, for the most part. And I don't take this the wrong way if this wasn't you, was sold out. Like had something on the books and could have sold it 10 times over probably, because everybody started pushing dates back. He suddenly had a bunch of openings. So he was reaching out to me, hey, if you get any more calls like this, send them my way. And so, his crew is also one of those that, they're typically farther than I would have reached out. But in the same respect, knowing that because they're hurting to kind of fill that calendar from some of their postponements, they're going to make things work as well.
For sure.
So it's weird because I feel like COVID has allowed me to kind of branch out because I never was in that immediate circle. Like with you, Lori, Michael, you go down, so do your acquaintances.
Exactly. Then that's my biggest downfall is that I have been over the last few years through the Disc Jockey News connections. I've been trying to connect with more DJs locally. I mean, I had some of my friends, but some of the guys who I started with have kind of semi-retired from the biz. So they're not doing weddings anymore. Like, a couple of them haven't done a wedding for 5 years. They'll do a backyard party twice a year, and there's their DJ work. So I've had to kind of been trying to extend that prior to 2020 and in the last couple of years. So that's been nice to be able to see some new people and get some new faces on your Rolodex, for lack of a better way to describe it. And then when you come into this situation, is that now if I am sick, and I'm specifically sick in a COVID situation, that takes out my whole household. So now my options become, I have a college student up in NDSU, so there is that. Brandon becomes my if I can't find anyone else, because he's got a little experience but not a ton, and he's basically that push play type of guy you were referring to earlier. But it's the trying to have that group, and that group it's interesting how that group has evolved. Specifically, is that I think I last week I ended up talking to 8 DJs, and we'll get into the reason why on that. How last year those 8 DJs were very active DJs, and this year they're not. A couple of them are, and it's not because of the gigs not being there. One thing that's kind of a little weird thing is. We're just talking, Shani did her segment for next week, and Illinois is basically shut down. Chicago is pretty much shut down, and people haven't been doing. Minnesota is kind of shut down in some ways. You're still able to do some dances here and there. The more chain hotels type of places are doing small. They're not doing much of anything. They'll do a small event and that's it. But some of the more mom and pop backwoods places, they're doing weddings, and some of them are doing very big weddings. A couple of them have been busted. A couple of them have become super spreader events that have hit the news. But there's things going on now. DJs are working here in Minnesota at a level. So it's interesting to see how those 8 contacts, how that's changed. So, last week it looked like this might be my first time in 30 some years of not being able to do a show. Have you ever had that situation, Dan, or have you been, knock on wood, able to do pretty much all of them?
Knock on wood, give me the salt and throwing it over my shoulder. I've had sore throats. I've had deaths in the family. I was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been there throughout. My partner actually, he was early on when we first split into 2 for the Sound Force back in that day. Warner actually went and broke his leg the morning of a wedding, and did the wedding with a splint from the doctor on a chair. And we always basically said, if Warner can do a wedding with a broken leg, we can go with the sniffles.
Yeah.
Up until 2020, you unfortunately can't do that anymore. So getting back to last week, finished Monday when I did the show with you, Dan. The kind of this sore throat was kicking in. The runny nose started Sunday, sore throat on Monday, and then Tuesday just kind of was this lethargic. Just kind of felt like crap all day. It got to the point about 5:00 on Tuesday. Lori's like, "Are you doing shows tonight?" It's like, I am canceling the shows. I was just ready to go to bed. I was just not feeling well. So I contacted the doctor Wednesday morning first thing, and the doctor's like, "Hey, this doesn't sound good. Let's give you let's have you come in for a COVID test." So went in, did that, and wasn't running a temperature, but just felt like crap, and with the drainage and the sore throat. And then I was getting this cough going on. So a typical year, I would have said, "Oh, I've got a chest cold coming in that might progress into." If this would be January, in a typical year, it was a chest cold that'll turn into bronchitis in about 4 or 5 days. And then I'll go in, they'll give you the meds, and I'll be done in 10 days. That's what this felt like. But this isn't a typical year. So did the COVID test Wednesday at 2:30. They say it's going to take 2 to 3 days before you can get the information back. Okay, Wednesday, Thursday's 1 day, Friday's 2 days, Saturday's 3 days. This could be a problem. But yeah, maybe I'll feel better. So it won't matter. Thursday was okay. Friday, I just felt like crap, complete crap. So I started actually Thursday just to kind of put feelers out with some other people I contact. And it was like talking to DJ A. They're like, I've got I'm a cancer survivor. I'm not taking shows. I may never DJ again. This is a person who is very, very active. Was doing like 4 nights of clubs. I mean, it would be like a Minnesota version of Shani. Is what that person was, where in the clubs, and if you're not in a club, they're out doing mobile, very, very active and very busy, not going out and doing anything. Okay. And it's like, okay, so what are you doing? Well, I've got a party. This, person B, I've got a party, but it's in the backwoods in northern Minnesota, and they're going to have like 400 people or something. And they're going through, and it's like, oh my gosh. They're like, yeah, but I'm under my personal tent. It's a 10 by 10 tent, and nobody can come in. They have to stay out there, and they're staying there, and I'm in there, and off they go. Those underground events. So of the 8, 2 weren't doing shows anymore for 2020. The others they all had something going on Saturday night. So then I started, then Friday night, as I was feeling crappy all day Friday, I started and went to a couple of others that I know of, but I don't talk to on a semi-regular basis. Nobody was available. It was just getting to that point, and it's like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the first show I can't go to? Because if I feel I could probably power through, as a typical, but if I find out that Saturday at some point in time my email comes across and it says, "Bing, you're positive," what do you do?
Yeah, I mean the liability alone for that situation, I think is just like, that was the thought that I had run through my head with you, because I know when we talked, you were telling me you weren't feeling so hot and stuff like that, and I'm like, okay, that's not great, but fortunately it's not. Hopefully it's not COVID. And then as we get, and then you said, well, I got the test, and I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't, this doesn't come back, because if you get stuck, I mean, that's the thing. If it's positive and you show up to an event and you do it, and let's just assume for a second, just one person, like you don't get like a bunch of people, you get one person. The liability from that, because you knew, and you went out, and in some states, and I don't know if Minnesota's doing this, but I've been reading about some states where if it's like you test positive and you go out in public, like there's huge fines, there's potential jail time, like there's all these things. And granted, I'm reading this just kind of briefly, and so if I misquoted, I'm sorry, but there's huge things that can come back on you for that. So it's just like, where is where is your protection? Like where do you draw that line of oh boy?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things, if you guys have checked your liability insurance, that would not be covered if you somehow. And I had a conversation with the DJ yesterday about this, and they're like, oh, they'll never be able to trace it, and they couldn't prove it was you and not someone else. Well, if you happen to follow tonight, when they were talking about contact tracing in the White House, that they can go and genetically contact trace the virus, and they can almost tell the succession of where it started, who spread to who as they're going through this. I mean, it's kind of scary of how well some of this information can come through, and they can basically then point to say, oh, you're the person who brought it into the White House. They're just about, I mean, some doctors say that they can accurately do that, but I mean, that just being close is scary, because in our case, oh yeah, we can test, and we know that the DJ brought it into the party. Oh, really? And then we find out, well, the DJ found out on Friday that he was, COVID positive, but yeah, so.
Well, and even so, even if let's say the tracing isn't there, it's not hard to come out if you were sick and you tested positive. I get the asymptomatic, like you could somehow pull that one off and potentially hide it, assuming that your results never were made public. But if you were somewhat sick and you tested positive, it's not hard to figure out the one person who's in that scenario or in that situation. So.
Yeah, exactly. And that was obviously a huge concern. So as I get up Saturday morning, and after a 13-hour, I basically crashed at 8 and woke up at 9 the next morning, felt much better. And it's like, yay, this is good. I said, most likely I'm not, COVID positive and such. So it is, but there's always that part of it. It's like, okay, one of our friends, Cubby, just finished up fighting the COVID stuff. He's actually feeling much better. He's going to be on probably next week with me. Sometime during the week, we're going to do a show, having him share his experience. But he talked about having good days and bad days, and it's like, okay, Saturday, I'm feeling really good. Is this a good day? And but I didn't think so. and I was talking to Lori about it, it's like, if before I leave today at noon, if all of a sudden I find out and it does say positive, what do? I can't find anybody. Da, da, da. And she's like, I don't know. Does a person just not look? you know, if you don't know, you can't, you have that denial that, oh, I was feeling good and I didn't know my results came in. It's a tough call of how you play these types of things, especially if you are feeling a little under the weather. It's just a crazy, crazy time.
Well, and even I feel like in some aspects, you almost have to be careful from the don't know case. You've had the test, like the doctor suggested you have the test. This isn't like, oh, I'm going to go get myself tested just in case. Mm-hmm. Like, the doctor wanted you to come in and have a test. And so I almost feel like there is some of that. Like for me, I would have a hard time. I would have a hard time knowing that the test hasn't come back yet. But also knowing that I'm stuck between, kind of a rock and a hard place. I reach out to everybody they can reach out to, and there's nobody that's getting back to me with any possibilities. And so it's like, what do I do in that aspect?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that this really makes a solid case for is getting an assistant if you don't have one. And I know this is probably the year that you're almost like, really, that's an expense that I really want to deal with right now. But I really feel that it if nothing else, this pulls it in, because if you can train somebody to be there with the idea of running sound while you're emceeing, or to help with the setup, to all the little nuances of your stuff. Mm-hmm. They're already, first off, then they're already on the calendar for that weekend.
Yeah.
All right. And then you could say, well, it could be said, well, if you were with them the week before, would they have to quarantine too? And that's a whole other.
It's possible, but I think the testing, and this is spent about a half hour on a phone today with a nurse from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, getting information about COVID testing and how this is going to go forward into 2021. And your suggestion of having an assistant actually fits in very, very well to how this could play out for next year if we have the same situation. David just mentioned in the chat room that tested positive about 3 weeks ago. Then it sucked because if he would have had events booked during that time of quarantine, he technically could not go out. Couldn't go out and do those events. So if you had the assistant, you could do it. Now, would the assistant test positive also? Well, if you were together the weekend before, and what they're saying is basically it takes somewhere between 3 and 5 days from exposure to showing up on the test. So if our assistant, let's call our assistant Jimmy, because Jimmy is such a nice name. Our assistant Jimmy is tested on Thursday. That would mean that if Jimmy tested negative on Thursday, that means they're probably good from the weekend before when they were with me. So then Jimmy could go out and do the event by themselves. So it could definitely work. The problem is the COVID tests themselves and the turnaround time. In Minnesota, and this is not national, but this is the situation we have in Minnesota. In your David, let us know. He's from Missouri. David, what was the time from when you took the test to when you got the results back? And please put that in the chat. In Minnesota, we have it can be anywhere from 1 day to up to 7 days, and it all depends on how busy the Mayo Clinic in Rochester is, because that's where a lot of the cases or a lot of the outstate samples are sent. In my particular case, it took from till Saturday morning about 10 o'clock. So it wasn't quite 3 days, but it was very close to 3 days. That's unfortunately going to be continuing into 2021 if there's going to be a high number of these, the 20 to 30,000 tests done a day, like their goal is in Minnesota. Fever. Okay, he hasn't gotten there yet. In Minnesota, we do have a 1 hour test, but that's being kind of rationed across the state to the hospitals that get a few of them, and it can only do so many per day of those 1 hour tests because there's so few of them. So they're rationed out and are keeping these for emergencies. So if somebody is in a car accident. They can come in, they can test them basically before on their way to the operating room and know if they're COVID positive before they start doing their operating and figuring out how they would have to handle them. For us as entertainers, this makes it really, really difficult because we could do a show Saturday. My show Saturday, there was a person in there who was sneezing and coughing and hacking. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not used to being around that, people sneezing and coughing at that. And it was like, oh, I mean, it sounded like a person who is a chain smoker and had allergies, or you put the two together. They were just going, it was, and they were one of the workers there. So you've got that going on. So it's like, okay, you could see how in the right or wrong situation, I'll be exposed to some things on a Saturday if I'm doing shows on a regular basis. And then how, do you make yourself as safe as possible for the next weekend? It's going to be a tough balancing act as we go forward.
David said, David did get back to us about how long. He said 2 days to get the results. He says he's in a small town, about 20,000 people, and just this week got a fast test at the urgent care, 15 minutes.
Oh, so they've got him in Missouri. Nice, and that's going to make it much easier because ideally, as a wedding DJ, if I'm booked wedding after wedding after wedding, I could go in there and do my Saturday. Thursday, go in, and if I could get a 1 hour or 15 minute, 1 hour is what they have in Minnesota. Maybe it's a 15 minute, and they just say it's a 1 hour one. I don't know. But then you could take something on Thursday, and if you came out of that and you're negative, you're fairly confident going into this weekend's weddings that you're safe to be around grandma and grandpa. I think that's really what's going to be needed in our world as we go forward. Yeah, Dave, anyone afraid to cough in church or grocery store? Because of the last week, and I had that kind of that dry cough going on throughout. I mean, I probably have gone through 4 bags of cough drops last week. It was just crazy. I was thinking I was going to be that person up on stage coughing. And there was a couple of times like a coughing fit. You could feel it coming on. So that was one of those times where I had to go down and tie my shoe behind my DJ system and try to cough as quietly as I could.
Oh yeah, you got to hide it when you can, just for the sheer looks, if nothing else.
Yeah. Especially now. I mean, not that you'd ever really want to be that guy up there, up behind the DJ system. I don't like to drink and eat, and I don't mind making rude gestures. That's a different story. But
of course, that's expected from you.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I think that you've hit on a pretty significant thing. You have to have a backup plan of some sort, and your backup plan, if it's been your family, that's a great backup plan, but you need to kind of look for another avenue, another piece. And I've struggled with the whole assistant thing. Like, I was getting ready to do it, and then the person I was trying to bring on board, they moved away. And so my backup plan, if my circle of people doesn't come together, my photo booth guy has had a career and has done DJing on the side, and he's kind of gotten out of it for a little bit. But I've had him when he's along with me. I'm like, hey, run the board. I'm gonna go out MC from the floor this time. Like, I'm gonna go out in the middle. I'm gonna lead this whole thing, and I can cue you for music, and so it's gonna come together a little bit better. And he jumps right in. He loves it. He's like, yeah, I'm good with this. He's like, I don't want to go out and do a ton of events, but helping like this is cool. So I think ideally bringing your plan to the forefront is going to help. And don't wait until it's the week of and you start having the sniffles, and then it's like, oh, what do I do? Mm-hmm. Get some of those plans in place, start working on them now, because whether it's this or whether it's the tarantula flu or something else that comes down the road next, who knows what some of those things are going to be, and the more you're prepared for it, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having those plans, and it's just the idea. If we'd have had this conversation, 2 weeks ago, of having a plan, I'd have been like, oh yeah, I've got contacts, I've got this handful of people, because I didn't realize how many underground, hidden, not talked about events, whatever you want to call it, were out there. It's like, you're doing what? Oh yeah, there's this private barn, and they've been doing weddings with 300 to 400 people every weekend from May on. They've been having a great time. It's like, really? How? What? Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting what is almost attributed to some of that delay or some of that maybe increase. So earlier in the chat, somebody had mentioned how like a lot of the spring weddings obviously didn't happen spring and early summer, in majority of the states, and things got pushed to the fall. And for the states that are doing it, so PA has a situation right now where as long as it's outdoors, you can have up to 250 people. Mm-hmm. And what's being classified as outdoors is getting loosely interpreted by some of those venues that really just don't care.
Yeah.
But with that being said, your barns and especially with the huge popularity that they were to begin with, and then you add in the fact that they're one of the few places that are allowing the weddings to happen. It's creating this kind of almost double time effect for some of us, so that trying to find somebody who like, oh, somebody's going to be available, and then you start thinking, well, wait a minute, because barns are so popular, maybe the weddings are going to happen. Like my fall weddings, I have one that actually postponed. No, so I take that back. Two that actually postponed, that were fall, and they're now doing next year.
Yeah.
But everything else that went to next year was spring and early summer ones. Mm-hmm. So the fall, at least around here, the falls are happening for some places. So you might be in that situation of what you think is available, it might not be.
Yeah. Yeah. The fall, it was interesting. Is this past weekend's wedding was the only one that didn't go. The ones prior to were, still off the first wave concept. And the November, because I think I had 2 November weddings booked, and they were like fearing the fall, cold and flu or the flu season kicking in. So it's interesting how you've had such a busy fall in your area, and it just didn't seem to affect things. 5 weeks of trying to get a negative test. Yeah, I suppose, and I bet Chris couldn't go back to. Technically would not have been able to legally or safely go back to DJ an event, or really out in public, I suppose, without that negative test.
Dave's talking about the barn weddings. I hate to disappoint you, Dave. If you actually read the rule for PA, they're in the wrong.
Yeah, even though they.
Because I've had some of them be like, yeah, I know it's not allowed, but I'm just going ahead anyway.
I was going to say, I think some of the barn weddings like to make up the rules as they go. It's our place,
and what we found is that, or at least around here, the main forcing factor is the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. That those are the ones, because it's a state-run group. Those are the ones that are kind of like being enforced. And if you don't really have a license to sell, it doesn't matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
To them.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is that you've got venues and businesses that haven't had any money, as most of us haven't had any money come in, and now we have an opportunity to try to do something. And we had this discussion, and Cubby will when he's on, he's not the greatest health. He's got some issues with that. And it was a concern, he wants to be safe. He wants to protect himself. He doesn't want to die. And yet, and we've known people who have gotten sick and died that, he and I, they're friends of ours. So he had that. But on the flip side is that this is what he does for a living. He's a DJ. He doesn't do, he's not selling insurance on the side. He's not polishing shoes or anything. He's this. So he either works and makes money, or there's nothing. and unfortunately for him. So, yeah, and I think there's many places, venues and different businesses like that. And it sucks that, that it from the outside, it looks like they're just basically saying, oh, I don't give a darn about anybody. I need to make the money. But on the other hand, it's, what are their options?
Yeah.
They either close down, and yeah, it's really, really sad. Yeah, rural gatherings are and I think that's why you see South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Those are Minnesota not as much as the others right now, but I mean, still we're knocking out 1,000 new cases a day, or bringing 1,000 new cases in, which is almost as high as it was during the initial peak. So yeah, it's definitely the video's still rolling here.
Yep, I'm still high. It's still going on my side.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it stopped. So yeah, it's an interesting time. So yeah, the backup, have a plan, and then have a plan for your backup plan.
Yeah, and yeah, you talk about backup for your equipment. You've got backup for everything else. What's your backup? Pure and simple. Whether it's in the moment or whether it's, I mean, here's the other thing. We're talking like we have advance notice. What happens if Friday night you get hit hard?
Yeah, and it's possible.
Yeah,
and even if it's not the situation of COVID, Friday night you come down with the regular flu or even a nasty cold. As the doctors basically, we should get you tested. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's a cold. You just go have some Campbell's soup and you'll be great. There wasn't any discussion like that. It was, yeah, definitely different times.
Yeah,
definitely different times. Let's see. So coming up tomorrow night, speaking of kind of backup plans, with Ben Stell, we're going to be talking about basically when things go wrong at the event. We're going to have a few people have been asking about, hey, how can I do a workaround with this and a workaround with that? So we're going to dig into that a little bit tomorrow night, on some ideas of, if this dies, how could you have a piece maybe, or something inexpensive to get you through? And specifically, one of the areas that we're going to dig into is when speakers go down. We've all talked about it. What's nice about having 4-powered speakers is that if one of them dies, you still have 3 to do something with. But how could we take those 3 and use them up to their optimum sound capability without causing more damage to your gear? And we're going to dig into some of those tomorrow night with that. And then with Jay and Brian, we're going to talk about sometimes when you're doing a show, and this happened to me Saturday a couple of times, the dance floor wasn't hopping, and it's like, okay, where do I go? And you get to that where you need to have that kind of that song to save your butt when you're just kind of, and what are some of those songs that are your go-to songs when you need to do something, you need to have a big hitter because you got to turn people around and get them back to the dance floor, and you're just brain dead. So we're going to talk about some of those saving your butt type songs in tomorrow night's show.
Saving your butt all week long.
Yeah, yes. And of course, next week, Virtual Expo. Monday and Tuesday night, we have, I believe, around 20-some sessions that are going to be coming both nights. You can go out to DJNTVtraining.com and check it out there, or DJNTV.com/Virtual Expo 20. No, Virtual Expo. So the Virtual Expo or Virtual Expo
2020 is what we found.
Yeah, there we go. Virtual Expo 2020. That'll get you there out to the page, and you can be part of that next week. We're going to have you're going to be doing nightly drawings. We're going to be giving away a couple of $100 gift certificates on Monday and a couple on Tuesday for those who are going to be watching the show live. So if you are part of the event, you'll be able to be with us and hopefully do that. We're going to have the event is going to be streaming, and then we're going to probably do, I'm not sure how if we're going to do a Zoom chat on the side while we're watching. I've got to kind of work through a couple of different things. There was another chat option I wanted to do that was kind of a cooler chat, which would allow us to do tables, and I wanted to kind of utilize that, but I don't think that's going to come through because their tech help is not as helpful as they say they are.
Lovely.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, just contact us and we'll be right back to you. No, you aren't. Lies. All you do is lies. Yeah, excellent.
All righty. Well, a little plug everybody's been doing in the chat room, so we'll throw it out here for those of you that are listening and not maybe reading. Make sure you're also doing the chill room. That's going to be available, djntv.com/chill. And John, remind me the password. DJNTV.
Passcode is lowercase DJNTV.
Yep. So because of the way Zoom's doing things now, you have to have a password. So there you go. It's in the chat room as well. So make sure you're all set to go. You can hang out. And you know what? Maybe you can find a substitute that would be willing to fly to cover your in case you get sick.
Yeah, yeah.
I told John, I said, I could have flown in. Notice he never offered.
No, not so much. No. Ironically, right now with the airfare, you probably or the flight, you'd probably have caught something on the airplane. Then you'd gone home and taken it back to your family, and then I would have felt like really bad.
That's true. That's true.
That would have been bad.
Oh well.
But yeah,
it was the sentiment. It was
the links are there. Check it out. Head out to the chill room, and the passcode's there, so you guys can do that and have a great evening.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join in with us. Of course, a lot of great things happening this week. John previewed a bunch of the shows. And then, of course, next week, don't miss out on the virtual expo. You're going to be mad if you did. So me personally, you'll see me in 2 weeks. Otherwise, maybe in the chat room. Enjoy yourself a wonderful week. Have a great night.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.